Welcome back to the Bob Fu Report. I want to talk about a viral story, a tragic story in China, and also received major widespread international attention in recent months. It is about what is called the Chen woman. And of course, those who try to help her also got persecuted, including Christians. It started this known as a Chen woman video was published by a Chinese vlogger who was trying to raise funds for those in poverty. Originally, it was posted on January 28th on a Chinese TikTok called Douyin. All of a sudden, within a short period of time, according to the cumulative reports, documentation, nearly 2 billion people viewed that posted video. And the story happened in a county called Feng County, located at Xuzhou City, Jiangsu Province, southeast of China. Actually, relatively very well-off province. After this video became viral, and the county government tried to control the media narrative, they released 2 statements actually, claimed the Chen woman once had a husband. She gave birth to 8 of his children. And the same statement by the government propaganda also claimed her family name was Yang. Of course, many Chinese netizens, so the internet citizens, they immediately saw the loopholes, the lies, the deceptions in these government propaganda statements. They would not believe the government would really lie to their face. So all of a sudden, literally many Chinese netizens had become amateur and maybe more professional investigative reporters and detectives. So through the word and through the location the government described, through the name searching, even through the photos of the government released marriage certificate, the Chinese netizens found so many basically faking and lying details by the initial 2 statements the Feng County and then Xuzhou City tried to make a false narrative. And many people, of course, try to pay attention to take care of this woman. And this woman was described on the video, showing she was shivering with a lock on her neck and barely can speak a complete sentence. If you listened carefully, you can hear what she said. This world is not welcoming me. This world is not welcoming me. She was locked at kind of a half basement room for the past some 20 years. During that time, she was chained with a lock on her neck and giving birth to 8 children. So a lot of questions were raised. Of course, first one is, how did she end up into this village in the Feng County in the Jiangsu province at the first place. And what had happened to her? She was seeing like half of her tongue was cut, and she was actually described after the report erupted. She was described with a psychological problem, sent to a psychiatric hospital, and then finally, like how the local government handle this, and why did they cover up the story? Like, what's the relationship? First of all, of course, we all know because of the decades of Chinese Communist Party's one-child per family policy until 2016. The Chinese Communist Party changed its policy for over 2 decades. Under this brutal family planning system, the Chinese Communist Party engaged almost really a gendercide campaign, because of course the traditionally the coupling with the Chinese traditional culture that preferred boy over girl. So with this massive family planning policy, the government engaged a state-sanctioned, really massive forced abortion and forced sterilization campaign. And from the state central government level to the village level, there are hundreds of thousands of full-time family planning officers. Their only job is try to make sure no women would give birth to a second child. And even for the first child, if you are a civil servant, I used to be working in the Beijing Communist Party school. We were regarded as part of the civil servant system in 1990s. And if you could not get a quota in your work unit and got pregnant accidentally, then a forced abortion is guaranteed if you are caught. And basically you will lose your job, you will your family and your even the officers in your work unit, like in my school, all the top officials would be held accountable without further promotion. So the Communist Party engaged, I think this is perhaps the worst historically massive forced abortion campaign, according to the Chinese then premier Wen Jiabao's own admission in Copenhagen, in Denmark, in the UN climate summit, and he proudly proclaimed that as Chinese Communist Party's contribution to the decrease of the pollution and the help the world environment, decades of Communist Party's family planning policy ended up with over 300 million children were being prevented from being born. This is from the Chinese Communist Party leader Wen Jiabao in the international stage, said Communist Party had successfully prevented over 300 million children. That's about the size of Americans' population. in decades of family planning system. I mean, at least 2/3 of those who were prevented from being born were forcefully aborted from their mother's wombs, including many children, including many Christian mothers, even pastor's wife. And we knew this, and it's very well documented. So the question, concerning this Chen woman story was raised. So how could this woman end up giving birth to 8 children from 1998, when she was described married to this man called Dong, and the official explanation, according to the first and second statement, was the husband Dong did not voluntarily obey the birth control device, or the birth control device failed. That's how the explanation, kind of a laughable explanation, was kind of pronounced by the official statement. Of course, nobody would believe that. And I think the horrible story surrounding that highlight another major disaster. Besides, of course, the disaster of the family planning, but the other one is more horrible. That is the nationwide, actually, trafficking of women in China. Those of you who did not pay attention on this issue may not aware of this fact. According to the State Department, the U.S. State Department trafficking office, there was an ambassador at large appointed every year to monitor the global trafficking of women and children. And guess what? China had become the global epicenter of women trafficking. Global center of trafficking. Not only domestic trafficking, those women were purchased, bought from those poor areas, especially minority areas in like Yunnan, Sichuan, Guizhou, Tibet, or the Jilin province, the Korean minorities, but also global trafficking. Many mainstream newspapers, medias, even like New York Times and many others, had written investigative long reports documenting this, how those women from Burma, from Vietnam, the so-called Vietnamese bride, the women has become a business, a major trading issue between China and Vietnam. A lot of Vietnamese girls. And actually, some years ago, we even sent Chinese staff to the Korean-China border. And our staff, I witnessed on the border area that a Chinese man can trade a woman, can purchase a woman, bought a woman on the border area from North Korea with 1 box of instant noodles. So 1 box of instant noodles, a North Korean young girl would be sold. So this woman, this Chen woman, she was, the truth of the matter is, she was trafficked. She was not only trafficked to this last man, Mr. Dong, she was sold 3 times. 3 times. We still don't know the other 2 of her so-called husbands. And she was totally traumatized. And now the Chinese government refused to release her. And you talk about the real outrage, right? I mean, this is it. It shows the sentiment of inhumanity. I mean, the total disregard of human life. I think after years of atheistic communism ideology. And I want to also share that those, I mean, with 2 to 5 billion views, I mean, Chinese population is 1.3 to 1.4 billion. And you can tell it's almost grasped like every Chinese citizen's heart, and including many Christians. So one of them is Mr. Zhang Yu, who is a member of the Early Rain Covenant Church that the church has been receiving most brutal crackdown in the past few years. Brother Zhang Yu, he's an artist. He graduated from Sichuan Fine Arts Institute, and he heavily and actively involved in basically highlighting this Chen woman issue, and through his painting, writing poetry and article, he basically organized a Renew China, an online prayer meeting organized by Christians. So the live-streamed prayer meeting focused on this Chen woman case. He talked about his opinions, of course, from a Christian perspective, and his concerns, and presented the supporting materials to discover the truth. And then, in February, Brother Zhang, was at midnight. He was arrested and summoned to the police for interrogation. He was mistreated. The police basically wanted to see him and to ask him, why did he post these comments about Chen woman? Why can't he shut up? Basically, that's what happened to him. Another young lady, a Chinese Christian too, Sister Li Yu, because she also, post photos, images of her imitating of that Chen woman on her neck, and she also using social media. She was basically taken away by the police and was disappeared recently, and she just want to call attention. And she herself was brutally persecuted in the past and was sentenced altogether for 6 years. And even she gave birth to a child before the second imprisonment. And the Chinese government even confiscated her own boy, a healthy boy, now end up in the Chinese orphans. So, brothers and sisters, as James chapter 1, verse 27 said, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep ourselves from being polluted from the world. After hearing this story, I hope you can also at least pray for China, pray for this massive, of course, gender side. Really, lots of girls were killed because the gender imbalance, is huge in China. There are more than 40 million more men than women in China. So that is another big issue, dangerous issue facing China and the world. So also pray for this Chen woman, of course, and those who are affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for that report. Our next story, March 1st, marked the date of the Religious Information Act going into effect. These administrative measures were drafted back in 2021 when the Chinese Communist Party wanted to make it illegal for religious content to be posted online. And they just went into effect on the 1st of March 2022. Now, we've talked about these measures on the Bob Fu Report many times, but essentially what these measures do is make it where you have to have a internet license to post religious content. Without this license, any religious content of any kind is illegal, and the CCP can take action against you. We're not really quite sure what that looks like quite yet, so you can stay up to date on ChinaAid.org for more updates. But what we're seeing is that it is also increasingly difficult to get these licenses. You have to fulfill two criteria. The first one being is that you have to be a clergy member of one of the 5 state-sanctioned religious groups in China. 2 examples of these is the Catholic Patriotic Association or the Three Self Patriotic Movement. You have to be a clergy member of one of those 5 organizations, and the CCP just made it more difficult for that to happen. And the second criteria is that you have to appeal to the local, not the local government, the central government. So you're making, not only do you have to go through this strenuous process of being a clergy member of one of these groups, but you also have to appeal to the central government. So it's not only a long and arduous process, but it's also more scrutinous as well. With the central government having access to all of your data, being able to interview many of your family members and that sort of thing. And then even after getting the license, your content is heavily monitored because it can't be in any way detrimental to the Chinese Communist Party. And then it also, you can't share this content with children or minors or soldiers or any of the hundreds of groups that it's illegal for them to consume religious content. So these measures have really strictly confined the Christian movement in the digital atmosphere, but it's also made it increasingly difficult for house church members. Some of you may recall that in 2020, the Chinese Communist Party made it illegal for Christians to meet in the excuse of COVID. And it became increasingly more apparent over time that COVID was just an excuse. They just didn't want Christians to meet. And so this forced a lot of house churches to meet on online meeting platforms like Zoom. And obviously we saw that didn't stop the officials from raiding Zoom meetings, taking church leaders away during Sunday services and that sort of thing. But what we're seeing now with these new administrative measures is that the CCP is going to be able to directly target those meetings, and they're also going to prevent these house church Christians from sharing these links online. So stay tuned on ChinaAid.org to see how these Christians adapt to these differing situations, and you can support these Christians at ChinaAid.org by donating as we do what we can to help with their legal defense. Our next story is that ChinaAid recently published its annual persecution report. ChinaAid works very closely with sources on the ground in China and has one of the most comprehensive and accurate reports of persecution in mainland China. Now, ChinaAid, we focus our efforts on all religious groups, but this specific report is just for Christian persecution. We found a couple of pretty apparent trends in 2021. The Chinese Communist Party used economic and violent means to oppress house church Christians. And not only that, but there was a very coordinated effort against Christian education in China as well. We saw this with the Abeka agents that were arrested, hundreds of schools being shut down, namely Jordan River Learning Center and other private schools. Bob Fu actually commented on these trends. He said that our report further confirms that the CCP's war against religious freedom in independent faith communities intensified in 2021. The international community should be concerned about the concentrated effort against children in China that restricts access to religious information and religious education, especially Christian literature. This clearly violates both the children's and parents' rights as enshrined in various international legal norms for safeguarding children's religious freedom. These dramatic measures solidify the widespread atheistic brainwashing within China's state-controlled educational system. But despite all of these cases that we recorded and reported in our report, there was something that China Aid discovered, and that was that a lot of lived persecution experiences were actually underreported to overseas organizations. And this can be for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons being that they're afraid of further persecution from the central government in China. And so they don't report, they don't allow us to use their names or anything like that. And so that leads China Aid to believe that 2021 was probably one of the worst years persecution in recent history. So please be praying for our brothers and sisters in China as they continue to share the gospel and meet together faithfully. Our next story, we have two updates on some stories that we've talked about here on the show before. That's the Jordan River Learning Center. 4 teachers were arrested back in May of 2021. One of them was an overseer of the school, and 3 others were teachers. Jordan River Learning Center is a school associated with Mount Carmel Church in Wuhu, Anhui Province. But 2 of these teachers were actually released on bail recently. And those 2 teachers are Han Yanlei and Chen Yunfei. All 4 of these teachers were initially arrested on suspicion of illegal business operations, which is a very typical charge for, not only Christians in house churches, but also especially Christians in, private schooling sectors as well. The 2 arrested teachers that are still being held are Wan Haxia and Wang Minghai. Minghai is actually a nurse at another hospital. So she was not only working as a teacher, but she was also serving people in the hospital. And this just goes to show you that a lot of these people are economically vulnerable. So them being in prison for over half a year is extremely dangerous for their families. So please continue to pray for them, and you can support families of prisoners on our website as well. Our last update comes from Chen Yunfei. We recently talked about him when we spoke about the top 10 cases of 2021. He's a well-known political dissident, Christian member of Early Rain Covenant Church. His initial trial, he was released back in 2020. He did a study on the 9-year compulsory education of the CCP, and then he was arrested in 2021 for picking quarrels and provoking trouble. But then suddenly, in December of 2021, during a secret trial, he was actually convicted of child molestation, which was clearly a charge to defame him and scrutinize him even further, ostracize his family. So recently, 2 of his lawyers went to visit him in Chengdu Pidu Detention Center, and he was unable to be reached, and the reasons that the officials gave was because the trial already happened. That's what they said. But clearly, the lawyers are trying to work to appeal this case and at least do what they can to, within the confines of the law, to make him free or to set the record straight. So keep coming to the China Aid website, get updates on these cases regularly. May the Lord bless you and keep you.